decades of tension before the first bomb fell. To understand the war unfolding right now in Iran, you cannot begin on February 28, 2026, the day the bombs started falling. You have to go back much further. You have to go back to 1979, when the Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah of Iran, took American diplomats hostage, and set the United States and Iran on a collision course that would define the next half-century of Middle Eastern geopolitics. For decades, Iran and the United States waged what analysts called a shadow war, a conflict fought through proxies, sanctions, assassinations, and cyber operations rather than direct confrontation. Iran built what it called its axis of resistance, a network of armed allies and militias spread across Lebanon, Hezbollah, Yemen, the Houthis, Iraq, various Shia militias, and Gaza, Hamas. Washington viewed this network as a destabilizing terror infrastructure. Tehran viewed it as strategic depth, a deterrent against the superior military power of the United States and Israel. The nuclear program was always at the center of the dispute. Iran insisted its enrichment of uranium was for peaceful, civilian energy purposes. The United States, Israel, and much of the Western world suspected it was cover for a weapons program. The 2015 nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was meant to resolve this standoff through diplomacy. It worked for a time. But in 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the deal and reimposed crippling sanctions on Iran, setting off a chain of events that would lead, 8 years later, to open warfare. Part 2. The Years of Erosion, 2023 to 2025. The conflict didn't erupt suddenly. It was built, piece by piece, through a series of escalations that each stripped away one more layer of stability. 2023 to 2024, the Gaza war changes everything. When Hamas launched its devastating October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, and Israel responded with a massive military campaign in Gaza, the entire regional architecture began to shift. Iran's proxies became active across multiple fronts. The Houthis in Yemen began attacking commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Hezbollah and Israel exchanged fire along the Lebanese border for months. Iran and Israel, for the first time in history, conducted direct exchanges of fire in April 2024 and October 2024, each retaliating against the other with drone and missile strikes. The weakening of Iran's allies. By 2025, Israel had systematically dismantled much of Iran's regional network. Hamas's leadership was largely eliminated. Hezbollah suffered catastrophic losses of both personnel and arsenal. Syria's Bashar al-Assad, a crucial Iranian ally who allowed weapons to flow to Hezbollah, was toppled in late 2024 and fled the country, severing a critical land corridor for Iranian influence. Iran's regional military position had deteriorated significantly by 2025. In 2024, it lost a key ally when Assad fled Syria, marking the end of that country's civil war. U.S. and Israeli military strikes further weakened Iran's nuclear program and the country's defenses. The 12-day War of June 2025. This was the first full test of open military conflict between Israel and Iran. Israel quickly debilitated Iran's air defenses and caused significant damage to Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. The conflict ended after the United States struck underground nuclear facilities in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan using GBU-57 bunker buster bombs in an operation that Trump described as a limited, one-off mission. Iran retaliated, but the scope was limited primarily to Israel and specific U.S. assets. A fragile ceasefire, brokered by Oman, ended the fighting. The war was brief, but its consequences were enormous. Iran's nuclear program was set back by years. Its air defenses were in tatters. Its economy, already staggering under sanctions, deteriorated further. The rial collapsed. Inflation exceeded 40% in 2025, January and February 2026. By early 2026, the pieces were all in place for a catastrophic escalation. Iran's regime was arguably at its weakest point in decades. Its allies had been decimated. Its economy was in freefall. Its people were in the streets. And its nuclear program, though damaged, was showing signs of revival. In January 2026, U.S. and European officials said Washington had presented Iran with 3 core demands: one of which was a permanent end to all uranium enrichment. Iran had previously called any such demand a red line, an existential concession it could not accept. That on February 24, 2026, during a State of the Union address, Trump accused Iran of reviving efforts to build nuclear weapons. He called Iran the world's #1 sponsor of terror, described its ambitions as sinister, and warned that Iran had developed increasingly advanced missile capabilities that can threaten Europe and our bases overseas, and they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. Diplomacy made one final attempt to pull the world back from the edge. On February 25th, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that a historic opportunity to reach a nuclear agreement with the United States was within reach, ahead of scheduled talks in Geneva. A third round of indirect talks took place in Geneva on February 26th, where reports indicated the sides remained far from agreement. On February 20th, President Trump had issued a 10-day deadline for a deal. The deadline expired. The talks failed. The attacks also followed the failure of indirect negotiations in February on a new agreement to curtail Iran's nuclear program. The mediating Omani foreign minister had stated significant progress, with Iran willing to make concessions, but President Trump said he was not thrilled with the talks. Behind the scenes, powerful voices were pushing for war. According to the Washington Post, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia Mohammed bin Salman had multiple phone calls with Trump urging him to attack, and Trump's decision to attack Iran came after the Saudi Arabian and Israeli governments lobbied him repeatedly. Part 4. Operation Epic Fury, February 28, 2026. At approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, Tehran time, the sky over Iran's capital turned to fire. Mid-morning on February 28, U.S. and Israeli forces began conducting joint strikes on Iran, numbering nearly 900 in just the first 12 hours of what the United States dubbed Operation Epic Fury. The attacks targeted Iranian missiles and air defenses, other military infrastructure, and Iranian leadership. The opening of this war was unlike anything the region had seen before. This was not a limited strike on nuclear facilities. The opening salvo on February 28, 2026, assassinated Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and several family members in Tehran. The killing of Iran's Supreme Leader, the most powerful political and religious figure in the country, a man who had ruled for over 3 decades, was a deliberate, dramatic escalation beyond anything attempted in the June 2025 campaign. A drastic strategic pivot from degrading nuclear infrastructure to executing a decapitation strike against the Iranian leadership shattered the previous rules of engagement, dragging the region into an open-ended war of attrition with zero diplomatic off-ramps. Iran's response was immediate and furious. Hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones were launched at Israel, at U.S. military bases across the region, and at Gulf states that had allowed American forces to operate from their territory. The war spread instantly beyond Iran's borders. Part 5. The war spreads, the first 2 weeks. What unfolded over the following days was not a replay of the 2025 12-day war. It was something far more expansive, more destructive, and with no clear end in sight. The death toll. At least 1,444 Iranians had been killed as of March 13th, including at least 168 children, who were killed in a strike on an elementary school that initial reports suggest the United States carried out. Israel's bombardment of Lebanon killed more than 600 people and displaced over 800,000. Iran's attacks across the region, as well as Hezbollah's assaults on Israel, killed more than 60 people and injured hundreds more. 13 U.S. service members have died. The scale of strikes. The U.S. Central Command announced that approximately 6,000 targets had been struck in Iran since operations began. Additionally, more than 90 Iranian vessels, including over 30 mine-laying ships, have been damaged or destroyed. Iran, for its part, said it fired about 700 missiles and 3,600 drones at U.S. and Israeli targets since the war started. The Gulf states under fire. Iran dramatically widened its retaliatory map. In 2025, Iran's retaliation was largely contained to Israel and specific U.S. assets. In 2026, Tehran has widened the map, launching strikes across 9 countries. Missiles and drones have hit U.S. military presence and civilian infrastructure in all Gulf states, including Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense said 4 drones were intercepted in the Riyadh metropolitan area. At least 2 people were killed and 12 injured. The IRGC also launched missiles and drones against U.S. forces at the UAE's Al Dhafra Air Base. Black smoke rose over the port of Fujairah, situated just outside the Strait of Hormuz, after debris from a drone interception fell, injuring a Jordanian citizen. Lebanon re-enters the war. Hezbollah, though weakened, re-engaged. Hezbollah battled to stop advances by the Israeli military in southern Lebanese towns, as Israeli air raids and artillery fire struck multiple towns. Lebanon's emergency services said Israeli attacks on 2 towns in the country's south killed at least 5 people, including a child. Iran's new supreme leader. The assassination of Khamenei did not decapitate the regime as hoped. Israeli strikes destroyed the building where Iran's Assembly of Experts was expected on March 3, 2026, delaying Iran's ability to select a new supreme leader. But Iran moved quickly. Within days, Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was elevated to the position. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that the new supreme leader had been wounded. Trump told NBC News he wasn't sure whether Mojtaba Khamenei was still alive, saying so far no one's been able to show him. The cultural cost. Iran said at least 56 of its museums, historic buildings, and cultural sites had been damaged by U.S.-Israeli strikes. Iran is one of the world's oldest civilizations, home to Persian antiquities thousands of years old. The loss of cultural heritage adds a dimension of grief that extends far beyond the political. Part 6. The Strait of Hormuz, the world's most dangerous choke point. Of all the consequences of this war, perhaps the most globally significant is what is happening in a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. The Strait of Hormuz. Around a quarter of global seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, along with roughly 1/5 of liquefied natural gas shipments. Any disruption to transit through this narrow choke point has immediate consequences for global energy markets. Iran moved to weaponize this reality almost immediately. Iran first vowed to fire on any ship attempting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz on March 2. Since then, about 500 oil and gas tankers, 500 container ships, and 6 cruise ships have been trapped on either side of the channel. At least 22 civilian vessels operating in and around the Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, and Gulf of Oman have been attacked by Iran since the start of the war. Iran's new supreme leader made the stance official. Mojtaba Khamenei said the Strait of Hormuz oil shipping lane will remain closed and issued a warning that bases used by U.S. forces will be subjected to further attacks unless they are shut down. The conflict disrupted approximately 20% of global oil supplies transiting the Strait of Hormuz, causing Brent crude prices to rise from around $70 to over $110 per barrel within days. At the peak, oil briefly surged to $119.50 during intraday trading on March 9. Trump responded by calling for an international naval coalition. Trump is hoping China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK, and others will send warships to the Strait of Hormuz to help open the passageway, as Iranian threats and attacks have brought tanker traffic to a halt. Part 7. The Global Economic Shockwave. The war's economic impact has radiated across every continent on Earth with stunning speed. Oil and fuel prices. The conflict caused immediate volatility in energy markets, with Brent crude oil prices surging 10 to 13% to around $82 per barrel by March 2, and disrupting 20% of global oil supplies. This is the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Global oil prices had surged by more than 25% since the start of the war, driving up fuel prices for consumers worldwide. The trend at European pumps has been upwards, with the largest increase observed in Spain, up 27%, reaching €1.79 per liter, and the highest price found in Ireland at €2.30 per liter. Diesel has also exceeded €2 per liter in Germany, Finland, France, Italy, and the Netherlands. Aviation and travel. Airspace closures in the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and other Gulf states led to the grounding of thousands of flights, affecting major carriers like Emirates Airlines and causing significant losses in tourism revenue. As of March 11th, more than 46,000 flights into and out of the Middle East had been canceled. Iran targeted airports in several countries around the region, including the world's busiest international airport in Dubai. Hamad International Airport in Doha suspended all flights from March 1st to 6th. Stock markets and financial systems. Stock markets experienced declines, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average falling over 400 points on March 2nd. The U.S. military's staggering costs. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury cost the U.S. approximately $3.7 billion, mostly unbudgeted. The opening week of the war cost the U.S. military more than $11.3 billion, lawmakers were told in a Pentagon briefing. The developing world's crisis. Djibouti's finance minister warned that the fighting would bring severe economic consequences for developing countries. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said his country's economy was in a state of near emergency, warning of growing inflation. Asia on the edge. China has large strategic and commercial oil reserves, which should help cushion short-term disruption. But China's already modest 2026 growth outlook could come under heavier pressure. India, with thinner reserves and a heavy reliance on Middle Eastern crude, is more vulnerable to a prolonged disruption. Higher energy prices are feeding inflation, weakening the rupee, and threatening growth. The specter of stagflation. Fears of stagflation, rising inflation and rising unemployment, which major oil shocks have historically summoned, are rising. Economists pointed to the crises of 1973, 1978, and 2008 as evidence that every significant spike in oil prices has been followed, in some form, by a global recession. Part 8. The diplomatic landscape. Who's saying what? The United States is prosecuting the war aggressively, but Trump's messaging has been characteristically contradictory. Trump told NBC News in a phone interview that Iran wants to make a deal, but he is not ready for one because the terms aren't good enough yet. He has called for regime change, but also signaled openness to a deal with a new leadership. Iran has rejected ceasefire framing entirely. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi refuted Trump and said the country has not asked for a ceasefire. No, we never asked for a ceasefire, and we have never asked even for negotiation. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes, Araghchi told CBS News. Israel has signaled a long campaign ahead. Israel's military says it is preparing for at least 3 more weeks of airstrikes, with thousands of targets still to hit. The United Kingdom has taken a firm diplomatic stance without direct military involvement. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, in a joint statement with the leaders of France and Germany, condemned the Iranian counterstrikes and called for a resumption of diplomacy. He said he did not believe in regime change from the skies. The Houthis in Yemen have so far exercised restraint, unusual for them. By March 7th, the Houthis had released only 3 declarations, with a tone characterized as more disciplined and subdued, seeming more as political and emotional statements in favor of Iran rather than practical military solidarity. This pragmatic attitude has been influenced by the 2025 United States Houthi ceasefire. China and Russia have not militarily intervened but are benefiting economically. Russia, despite its denial of providing alleged assistance, clearly benefits from the conflict's continuation, particularly the rise in oil prices. Part 9. Inside Iran, a nation at war with itself and the world. For the 88 million people inside Iran, this war layers fresh catastrophe onto years of accumulated suffering. In eastern Tehran, a resident named Seper keeps the front door of his apartment unlocked, a calculated routine allowing his family to sprint to an underground car parked the moment the booming explosions return to shake their windows. As thick, toxic smoke from burning oil facilities blankets the city of 10 million, the reality of a limitless conflict has set in. The regime that ordinary Iranians have protested against for years is now the same regime defending their soil. Many Iranians hold deeply conflicted feelings, opposing the Islamic Republic on the one hand, and opposing foreign bombs falling on their homes on the other. Iran's regime was arguably at its weakest point for some years when the attacks began, with extensive protests motivated by a weakened economy and struggling infrastructure illustrating the regime's weakened legitimacy within the country. The protests were put down with extensive use of force. Iran's conditions for ending the war include recognition of its legitimate rights, payment of reparations, and firm international guarantees preventing future attacks. These are not conditions the United States and Israel are currently prepared to meet. Part 10. What to expect? The road ahead. This is the most uncertain and consequential question. Where does this go from here? Scenario 1. A deal in weeks. Trump has repeatedly hinted at a willingness to make a deal, and some channels remain open. If Iran's new leadership, battered, isolated, and presiding over a devastated country, agrees to terms on the nuclear program, a ceasefire could be brokered. If the conflict is short-lived, inflation in Europe and Asia in 2026 would likely be only around 0.5 percentage points higher than pre-conflict forecasts. Central bank strategies would remain largely unchanged, and the impact on real GDP growth would be minimal. Scenario 2. A war of months. This is currently the more likely scenario. A more severe scenario in which the conflict persists for several months could see oil prices rise to around $130 per barrel before declining in the second half of the year. The Eurozone economy would probably contract in the second quarter. The U.S. economy would fare better, but would nonetheless experience a slowdown in growth. Scenario 3. Regional escalation. The greatest fear is that new actors enter the fight. If the Houthis fully re-engage, if Iraq's militias begin targeting U.S. forces in force, if China decides to use the chaos to move on Taiwan, or if Iran manages to strike a target that triggers a NATO response, the war could become something the world has not seen since 1945. The nuclear question remains unresolved. The IAEA discovered that Iran had hidden highly enriched uranium in an underground facility that was undamaged in the previous round of fighting. The U.S. Department of Defense estimated Iran's nuclear program had been set back by 2 years by its June 2025 strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. The fundamental problem that started this conflict, Iran's nuclear ambitions and the West's determination to end them, has not been solved by bombs. It can only ultimately be solved by diplomacy. The world economy hangs in the balance. This is not only a regional crisis. It is a structural shock to the world economy, delivered at a moment of geoeconomic fragility. The longer it runs, the more lasting the damage becomes. First it hits oil, gas, shipping, and aviation, then inflation, industrial costs, and food security, and eventually trade routes, investment decisions, and political stability. The risk of inflation will increase if the war goes on for several months and Brent exceeds $150, putting the world in a situation close to the 1973 oil crisis, according to Economic Nobel Prize winner Philippe Aghion. Conclusion: a world at an inflection point. What is happening in Iran right now is not just a Middle Eastern story. It is a story about the fragility of global order, the limits of military power, the consequences of decades of unresolved diplomatic failures, and the extraordinary interconnectedness of the modern world, where a missile striking an oil terminal in Kharg Island ripples out to raise the price of bread in Lagos, slow a factory in Guangzhou, and increase a household's energy bill in Warsaw. The Iranian people are suffering. Families in Lebanon are displaced. Travelers are stranded. Sailors are trapped in the world's most dangerous strait. Soldiers from the United States, a country thousands of miles away, are dying. And the global economy, still recovering from years of inflation, a pandemic, and trade wars, is absorbing yet another hammer blow. The deeper truth is this: no bomb has ever permanently solved a nuclear standoff. No assassination has ever ended a determined nation's will to defend itself. And no war started with the expectation that it would be clean, quick, or consequence-free has ever been any of those things. The world is watching a conflict that could define the next decade of international relations. And still, at this very moment on March 16, 2026, the guns have not gone silent, the strait is not open, and the deal has not been made. This narrative is based on verified reporting from multiple sources including Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, NPR, Britannica, the House of Commons Library, the World Economic Forum, Chatham House, and Foreign Policy, as of March 16, 2026.